Find out if the audio problem is solved. My name is host Eric, again, in case you've forgotten. And I'm here with my lovely wife, Rachel.
Hi.
And this time the audio does work. This time the audio works. So, yeah, sometimes my phone, it seems to have something to do with the Bluetooth connection in the car.
Oh.
Sometimes when I go to live stream, the mic isn't working because I think the car is claiming possession of it or something.
Mm-hmm.
I figured it was you, big dog. Despite the F. Okay. Merry Christmas. Merry Christmas Eve. Just want to wash my hands a little bit here. Been watching some YouTube videos this morning. Some of them kind of sciencey, some of them just kind of fun. Some of the sciencey ones are interesting, and some of them make me mad sometimes. They say things that I don't think are good arguments. Like, I like this Anton guy I watch. He does a lot of space stuff, but it's like I like watching his stuff in part because I hear interesting things. Like, according to most, I guess, biologists, I'm not sure, but it took 4.5 billion years almost for intelligence to evolve on this planet. Whereas we only have a livable planet for another billion years or so. So the idea being that if it takes that long to evolve intelligence, then um, we can reasonably expect it to be extremely rare in the universe because most planets aren't stable enough for long enough to support that development. But that didn't even bother me so much. Like, the reality of it is, of course, it didn't take that long because there were multiple extinction events. So, and there's no indication that humans existed before they existed. But the argument that made me mad wasn't even about evolution. It was the idea that you explain something by saying that the reason we see things as they are is because if they were different, we wouldn't see them as they are. This argument is bypassing the question of why entirely, right? Like, there are legitimate questions to be asked about the apparent uniqueness of.
Hi, Laura. Happy Christmas Eve.
Oh, this is like Rachel taking a phone call. There are there's no evidence at all that there's life anywhere else in the universe, let alone intelligent life. And we've been looking for it for many years with SETI, and uh, and so the idea is that we need some explanation as to if in fact it's correct to say that life's unique on Earth. We need some kind of explanation regarding uh, why we don't see it elsewhere, etc. Right? And the answer that because if things were different, they wouldn't be the same is not an answer at all to any question of why, right? what's kind of implicit is that the idea that just a set of incredibly fluky, freakish coincidences happen to allow it to evolve here rather than, but not anyplace else because of the incredible unlikelihood of it or something like that. But if there is intelligent life, if there is intelligent life, is there retarded life? Yes, there is retarded life. We know that here on Earth we have that, in fact. It's super stormy around here today. It's actually quite chilly. It's been not very cold. It's been a really mild December. But I guess what's really being said when they say if things were different, they wouldn't look the same is that um, if it if the answer to why life appears to be unique to Earth is that we just got it's just an incredibly unlikely fluke that could only conceivably happen once or something. Uh, and accordingly, there's no other explanation as to why except that's just how it is. But there's still not. Then that would be the answer. Is your daughter okay with all the flood in Los Angeles? Yeah, I would imagine she's fine. But I could call her and find out. Last time they had flooding down there, I think she. Oh no, that was the fires I'm thinking about. She should be fine. She's up high in an apartment building, like third floor or something. Hi, January Sports Highlights. You are very consistent, January Sports Highlights. You come here, you say hello, and then you never say anything else. You do it like practically every live stream. Oh, it's chilly out here. So, like this Anton guy, he's a good thinker. He's somebody I respect, and he said, what basically what the fossil record shows is that when there are available ecological niches, life evolves to fill until all those niches are filled. But um, I mean, I guess that's something of an explanation. Like, there obviously have to be unexploited resources for if new species were going to emerge. This doesn't make any sense, you know, at the end of the day. Are you ready for Santa and Powerball? I did buy Powerball tickets yesterday, actually. I almost never buy those, but I did buy Powerball tickets. Is that tonight when they pull that thing? Maybe I won. Who knows? Maybe I will have won after they do the drawing. It's not possible for me to have already won. We're supposed to be very much like at flood risk around here for this storm because we're gonna get like 3 or 4 days straight of rain. Um, but I'm not worried about us flooding here at my house because the house is designed to be basically flood proof. It's got great drainage.
care. Bye.
Where's Cameron? He's not here, I don't think. Am I looking forward to tonight's Hawaii Bowl? I probably will watch it. I wouldn't say I'm particularly looking forward to it, but I'm glad there's a bowl game on.
Who's in the bowl game?
Hawaii versus Fresno State, I believe.
Really?
Yeah, I think Fresno State's playing tonight. Eggnog with Southern Comfort. Ugh. When I was a teenager, I like to drink Southern Comfort and Dr. Pepper. You want to talk about a hangover?
That's easy.
It's just all sugar.
Yeah.
Southern Comfort is very sugary. Oh, Hawaii versus Cal. Okay.
Oh, I was hoping it was Fresno State. That would have been fun.
Fresno State does have a bowl game this season, but I'm not sure. I'll have to look at ESPN to see when it is. Well, Hawaii versus Cal sounds fun. You know, I do tend to like to watch ex-Pac-12 teams a little bit more than any random team. Let me look at the S-Spin and see when the Fresno State game is. Saturday at 1:30. That's when the Fresno State game is. Campbell. Penn State hired Matt Campbell from Iowa State. Let's see.
That story will probably be one of the bigger ones for at least sports for 2025.
For 2026, you mean, or 20? Oh.
Like, you know, looking back on the year.
Penn State collapsing.
Well.
Yeah, they had a rough season this year. That's cool. I like what the athletic director had to say about that hire. It's he tried to convey how, like, his legacy as an athletic director, his ability to work in that field even, was contingent on not fucking up this hire. He's not wrong. I don't know. I don't know if I'd want the Penn State job particularly. It seems like expectations outstrip potentiality at Penn State. Well, his record was pretty great, but he lost to UCLA and Northwestern this year. And you know, as Isaac Punch said when they lost to UCLA, I think it was, he's like, this never happens. Penn State is the school that always beats all the teams they should beat and always loses to the good teams. But, you know, they didn't lose to just good teams this year. And the thing is, now he's at Virginia Tech and took half of their recruits for next year. Well, maybe they'll get half of Iowa State's recruits with their new hire. Like, expectations in some of these places are so high. Like, if that guy who, I forget what his name is, who went from Washington to Alabama, if he hadn't made CFP this year, he'd definitely be on the hot seat, I bet. Even though, Nick Saban's a tough act to follow. DeBurs, is that his name? Something like that? So won't you tell me you'll never more roam? Christmas and New Year's will find you home. There will be no more sorrow, no grief and pain, and I'll be happy, happy once again.
What's that song?
Please come home for Christmas.
Oh.
No, we're not going Christmas caroling. It is very rainy and stormy outside.
Mm-hmm.
Kaylin DeBurr, yeah.
We got my mom. My mom says she loves you, by the way.
Oh, great, cool.
We got my mom oranges and tangerines and clementines, I think.
I didn't get my daughter anything for Christmas. You know, if I was going to be with her on Christmas, I would get her something probably, but. Yeah, I'm hitting this just because I'm so sick of the bong clogging all the time.
The metal pipe really comes in handy.
This is a great little pipe.
Yeah. I'm glad we got it.
Me too. I'll call Delilah today or tomorrow. She's been sick actually. We got Rachel's dad some chocolates.
Yeah, he was very happy.
It is super pocket friendly, but I don't usually take it out in the world with me. Am I grilling ribeyes for Christmas? No, we are not going back to the store until after Christmas.
Mm-hmm.
We went to the store yesterday, and we did get some stuff, but I didn't get steaks or anything. And again, it's too rainy to grill because I don't want to be outside. I do have a couple of little steaks, not ribeyes, but that I could cook maybe in a pan or something. But cooking outside is not a good day for that.
Mm-hmm. Is it supposed to rain for the next couple days?
Yeah, according to Microsoft Weather.
Wow.
Let's see what it says here. Supposed to get rain today, Thursday, and Friday. We have a little break in the rain right now, apparently. It's going to start again in an hour.
And then continue.
And continue all the way, all day Thursday, up until 3 in the afternoon on Friday. So that's good. I'm always happy to get precipitation.
Me too.
We need the water around here, and you know, we're not going to get, it doesn't seem like, any snow because it's just too much of a warm storm. Like the coldest temperature it has in the forecast for us today, and that's basically as low as it's going to get. Now, Thursday night, going into Friday morning, it's going to get as low as 41. In theory, we could see snow when it says on this temperature thing here like 40 or lower. Then maybe we can get a little bit of snow because obviously the snow starts the precipitation starts in the clouds up higher than the ground. You'd call this a piece? That's a good generational dividing line. People of a certain age call pipes pieces.
Pieces, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess I say pipe.
No, I'm not looking forward to watching Snoop Dogg during the Lions Vikings game tomorrow, but I'm glad to hear there's going to be a football game on Christmas. That's cool. Let's see.
I'm gonna go get the mail.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Oh, there's 2 football games on tomorrow, but the first one is pointless because both those teams are eliminated, I think. So you've got Detroit and Minnesota. Detroit is still in the running for a playoff berth. Minnesota's been eliminated. Dallas has been eliminated already, and so has who are they playing again? Washington. Yeah, Washington's been eliminated as well. So at least one game that still has something to play for. At least one team that still has something to play for is playing tomorrow. That's good. The Lions need to win that. That would put them at 9-7. Unfortunately for them, the Green Bay Packers have a tie this year, so they're 9-5-1. Sunday night, that's going to be a good game. Chicago versus San Francisco. They're both 11-4. And let's see. Chicago has clinched a berth, but has not clinched the division necessarily yet, I guess. Surprising. How many games are there? There's only 2 games left. Yeah, I guess Green Bay could surpass them if they lose both of them. And then the Niners have clinched a playoff berth, but also have not clinched the division. So I think both teams will probably be playing for the win, even though they're guaranteed a berth to the playoffs. Netflix is kicking themselves because instead of Patrick Mahomes and the winning popular Chiefs, they get a third-string quarterback from an eliminated team. Oh, you're talking about good job getting the mail.
Sure.
Anything you want to throw away, send it to me, I'll throw it away.
I don't know what this is.
Alright, so Netflix is getting one of those games tomorrow? It's on Netflix? Or is that not tomorrow? Let me see it. Well, there's 3 games on. Netflix has the Detroit, Minnesota game. Prime Video has the Denver, Kansas City game. So, but Netflix also has the Dallas, Washington game. I could watch the Netflix game at 1:30 potentially.
Uh-oh.
What?
It looks like your time has come.
Jury duty, huh?
You said you wanted to,
Oh
right?
yeah, I do want jury duty. But the report date was December 16th. So that was like a week and a half ago or something. I'll have to call them. I'll call them and let them know that what happened and see what they say. That's cool. I wish I had seen that in time. Oh well.
Well, it was unusual circumstances.
Yeah. How to spot autism in high masking adults. Oh my god. What are they doing?
Oops.
Oh, you got a star, huh?
Yeah.
Let's put it on the tree.
Oh no.
I don't know if this is gonna work. Let me try this. Okay, well,
Well,
that's not too bad.
that's
I guess.
something. Yeah, it's not gonna be up for much.
Much longer, yeah. So you know how it goes. I watch these sciencey things, and then sometimes they say things that make me mad. I did watch an interesting video this morning about a guy who I type as almost certainly an ENTP, talked about Dunbar's number. Dunbar's number refers to a, a calculation or operation that I guess some kind of scientist, I don't know what kind of scientist, but this guy named Dunbar in England, he put together this chart of all the primate species and the largest group that species manifests in. And then then he measured basically the brain size of each of the primates and determined, and it turned out that there's a proportional kind of correlation between the largeness of the brain and the largeness of the group size. And he calculated the maximum group for humans that can function as a group at 150. But then he talked about how that we can make like kind of macro groups by identifying as like the same religion or the same nationality or something like that, you know. And this guy who was being interviewed by this other guy, he had written a book called something like "Why Tribalism is Bad," which is a very NTP kind of thing to write. Seems to me. Uh, I'm not sure what the whole point of it was because I didn't watch the whole video. The title was like "Why Your Christmases Have Gotten Weird" or something like that. Dunbar's number. But I didn't watch long enough to see what linkage they made. Rachel talking with Kami on the phone. That Hofstetter lady that I like to watch, Sabine Hofstetter, I think her name is. I watch her sometimes. She's an ENSP, I think, as well. But she published a video recently about how basically fusion energy is going to actually become a workable producer of energy and a workable tech in the relatively near future. And it's going to be a sea change for people because what she understands correctly is that all human endeavor and the engine of our prosperity lies in the capacity to use energy. You don't get any progress, novelty, production, advancement, or whatever without external sources of energy. That's really the big advantage. This is just me talking, not her, but That's really the big advantage that people have, right, over other animals, is that we can use external sources of energy, like fire is the most obvious first one. But other animals as labor is, maybe that was like the first one. I'm not sure what came first. But there aren't any other species of animals that I know of that actively harness the energy potential of things not already expressing that energy, you know? Anyway, the guy talking about Dunbar's number, he did talk some about Neanderthals versus humans, for example, and how humans might have killed off Neanderthals in part because we were able to form these macro groups, in other words, to identify with each other and each other's interests as, say, the same species in a way that Neanderthals couldn't. It was just totally speculative on his part, really, but at least what he didn't say was that um, Neanderthals and humans interbred. Because if, in fact, we did interbreed with Neanderthals and produce viable offspring, then we were the same species all along. You know, I noticed yesterday that I was rubbing Casey Jones the wrong way with a lot of the things I was saying, but most of them being along the lines of, look, all I can do is be correct about something. It's what I have to offer, so to speak. But he kept throwing back in my face the general claim that I was somehow more right than other people and so forth. And I don't know what to do about that. You know, I get that it's not good FE to but the bottom line is I don't want to argue with people, you know? Hello there, Dennis Galler. I really don't want to argue with people. Hi, Winston's mom. Good morning. About things that I've had fully thought out already, because it's like always the case that the other person has not thought it out as much as I have. If it's one of the things I'm talking about, like explaining rather than just musing about, like now. Right now, I'm just kind of musing about these concepts I heard about in YouTube videos this morning. That's a different kind of thing that I'm doing than when I'm explaining something or explaining why something's wrong. Like last time was very frustrating because we had this lady come in who was enamored of Dave's superpowers, which is like the absolute bottom of the typology barrel, just the absolute worst. And she kept using all these terms that aren't real distinctions, that don't mean anything, and that have no precise or replicable way of determining if something qualifies as that or not, you know. And it's just like, you know, I don't know. Cognitive functions frustrate me as a topic. It frustrated me a lot because more than any other subject matter, you get tons of people who think they know about it, but are very wrong about it. I mean, I guess even worse than that topic would be evolution. That one is really the worst of the worst. But at least with evolution, um, I'm negating, you know. It's easier than affirming, for sure. At least we're talking the same language. We mean the same thing when we use the word mutation. We mean the same thing when we use the word, reproduction and selection and stuff like that. I mean, we have to specify what kind of selection we mean, I guess, because there are ideas of selecting in favor of positive mutation, which has long been falsified, but regardless. So I guess I prefer arguing about evolution over typology stuff. Because, one can only be so definitive and determinate about certain things because it is, after all, a model. Like, if you have a model of the solar system that has the planets go around the sun in at the amount of relative time that it takes, like, so let's say the Earth goes around the sun one time, Mars goes around however many times it goes around, etc. If you have all those things lined up, then you can model the movement of the planets around the sun correctly in relation to each other, right? Like, it may not start where it currently is, but it will show the relative speeds of the planets around the sun to each other. But that model doesn't actually accomplish the orbiting of planets around the sun in this with the same mechanism that the solar system does. So if you start saying, well, if this really models the solar system, then why don't we see slight variations in the planet's orbits when an interplanetary body passes nearby, for example? Because that's not included in the model, and the model doesn't work by the same mechanism as the actual thing. I'm from California, United States. Kuldeep Kuldeep Singh. Kuldeep Singh. Yeah, I'm from California, America. Eric, why don't you believe in evolution? Only religious fundamentalists don't believe in evolution. I saw an old video of a pastor, and he was making the same points as you against evolution. How do you negate animals change forms? I don't negate that they change forms. Obviously, there's, you know, adaptive plasticity within a genome, so that it makes perfect sense that if you isolate a population of let's say, bears on an island with not very much food, that conceivably the smaller bears would have a better opportunity to survive, and over time the population would get smaller. What it wouldn't do is change genomic signature, so they wouldn't cease being bears. It's in the same fashion that I can change my body to some extent, right, by working out, lifting weights, and so forth, but I can't change my arms into wings by flapping them. I'm 54 years old. Welcome to America from India. So the problem that evolution has is that is multiple, but one of the main things that we know about actual selection forces is that they select against things that are outliers. In other words, they select against mutations, they select against um, sickness, genetic disease, whatever. Things that aren't adequate members of a species will die. The thing is, we seem to largely agree that species aren't evolving now. At least there's widespread agreement about plenty of species that they aren't evolving now because you always hear things like uh, the dragonfly has remained unchanged for the last 180 million years. If a bear evolved into something else, it would still be Ursus. I mean, the point is, if we define species as having reproductively viable offspring, then dogs are still the same species as wolves, despite the fact that we spent 10,000 years trying to selectively breed them into a different species, whether that we knew we were trying to do that or not. No speciation has occurred, even though that kind of selection is vastly more extreme and like group isolating than anything nature could ever do. No, we're not discussing creationism. I'm not a creationist. That's not an explanation either. Do I know about Hinduism? A little bit, not a lot, but I know there are multiple gods. They don't eat meat, I think. That's about all I know about it. Hinduism seems thoroughly inoffensive as a religion. It doesn't bother me at all. Do I have a science background? No, I don't have a science background. But I do have a background in argumentation and substantiation. The other thing is, if in fact the basic concept of evolution were correct, then we should see much faster evolution in things that have short lifespans and short reproductive cycles, and much slower life evolution in things that have longer reproductive cycles. So, we've done experiments on 70,000 plus generations of fruit flies, and they're all still fruit flies. Well, sure, living things adapt to their environment in lots of different ways. Right. There's no mechanism for increased complexity. And there are also another good argument against evolution is there are plenty of things that have have necessary but insufficient conditions, right? So you might need to have three different components of a thing before it combines to be useful. And there's no way to explain how one component or the other would evolve until they were all there in place to work together, right? There's a lot of stuff like that. Most of all, it's it's definitionally it contradicts itself right out the gate, right? Because the only meaningful definition we have for species, there are two possible meaningful definitions. Either a genomic signature kind of definition, where you count the number of chromosomes and specific uh, genomic peculiarities of a given species, or you use the if if two things produce reproductively viable offspring of the same species. In either case, we consistently see the same things that genomes might get sicker over time. So some mutations are nearly neutral enough that they get included into the genome. So human genome especially is getting sicker over time because we do such a good job of preventing people from dying. The thing is also, evolution is essentially claiming that the same mechanism is causing evolution on organisms of wildly different time frames. So, uh, like the ancient bristlecone pine, that we've got examples that are over 4,500 years old. Any evolution that occurs with that tree is going to have to obviously occur very, very slowly because currently you've got new bristlecone pines growing, same exact species as ones that are 4,500 years old. And it's like there are adequate environmental changes at a low time frame level that we should continually see insects and such evolving because from their perspective the environment is changing that much. But we just don't see that. There's We've never seen an example of any pigeons give birth to anything but other pigeons. No, it selects against deviation from the genomic mean. So, like for example, if we were to let out all the dogs, all the people would disappear, and all the dogs would go out into the world, they most of them would die because they're not fit, right? Because they're bred for things other than actual survival fitness. And those are ones that did reproduce and stuff. You go back to a genomic mean kind of a speciation as selection selects against variations or outliers from that mean. And so, yeah, selection does exist. It keeps species healthy by making sure that almost never do mutations, for example, enter into the genome. But yeah, there's absolutely no explanation for increased complexity except mutation. But that's disproved a million times over. Like we just don't ever see that. We have an entire world of species to watch, and we just never see this thing that supposedly occurs all the time. It supposedly has to occur either constantly because it's a mechanism that makes sense, or occasionally for reasons unexplained. Like, no, things did evolve, but then they stopped evolving. But why? Well, because they didn't need to evolve anymore. But okay, surely in the last 180 million years, environments have changed enough that dragonflies would have needed to evolve, right? Surely that. Or would have benefited from evolving if the mechanism existed. Is retardation natural selection? I mean, the fact that people who are retarded survive and all that kind of stuff is kind of unique to humans. And so that's an example of the genome becoming sicker over time. That is sickle cell anemia. That's the actual form of evolution. The genome becomes sicker over time. What do I think about Darwinism? Well, I mean, it his was the initial foray into this notion, and it wasn't a bad intuitive leap to make. You see all these finches that are highly specialized to be in a certain niche, and conclude that they were once one population of finches that rewarded positive mutations in a way, selected in favor of mutations in a way that allowed them to take advantage of resources that were unexploited by the population of finches as a whole. It's a fine intuitive leap to make, right? But okay, so they won't change their form. They won't evolve unless they are ill suited to the environment. But if they are ill suited to the environment, won't it just kill them? There's only so much variation conceivable, right? How much how much ill suited to an environment can something be that it causes evolution but doesn't kill the organisms? Unless the environmental pressure reaches a certain threshold, at which point things do begin to evolve. And what's the mechanism by which they increase complexity? Because if you're saying it's mutation, that's not correct. We just have never seen that kind of mutation where you've got things developing increased complexity or a different whatever, you know. Hey, dude, I remember you from a year ago. Actually, damn, I messed up with Yulden. Okay. Well, because there's no reason to think there are positive mutations, and even if there were positive mutations, you got to remember that the only way that positive mutations link to increased complexity is when if and when they link to increased sexual reproductive viability, right? And there are plenty of of conceivable positive mutations that are necessary for something to evolve into whatever it is, would be necessary for it to evolve into whatever it is, that that don't actually improve reproductive success. So you have to have a combination of things occurring at the same time, even conceivably. You have to have negative selection against almost all of the other members of the population because the math doesn't work, right? If you've got a relatively large population of things, then a single positive mutation advantage is unlikely to uh, to be rewarded in any meaningful sense. The only way it could be rewarded is if a positive mutation occurs at the same time that environmental changes are killing off all the other members of the species so that you have a founder's effect. They've got this idea in evolution called bottleneck and founder's effect, right? That you have to start off with somehow a very small population of a differentiated thing that's been differentiated by a mutation, presumably, and then in that way you can start a new population with that mutation. But even in that concept, you're still dealing with two members of a species to reproduce, right? So either the mutated one is still the same species, has the same genomic signature, and is able to reproduce viably with the other, or they both have this positive mutation, or what? The one likes to stay silent after the sesh, and the another is him. Nonchalant as fuck. What the fuck? The white-coated animals that live near snow, it's a positive mutation for them in that environment, but would be detrimental to their other environment. No, it's what happens is that they have within their genome variations of black and white, right? And then it makes sense that, for example, there are these moths that in England during the Industrial Revolution, these white trees all turned black, and the moths all became increasingly dark, and then they were all gray instead of white. And then when the pollution went away, they went back to being white. Those are variations that are already present in the genomic plasticity, right? Remember how I said that you can work out your arms and have muscles, but you can't flap your arms and make them wings? Well, that's like a genetic muscle that's within the capacity of that species to select for or against, right? But it doesn't require any mutation because it's already there. Or you can imagine an equivalent where the something selects in favor of blue-eyed people and against every other color eye. Well, the reason it's able to do that is because some people have blue eyes already. So that's not a change in the genome at all. The population numbers are another critical thing to think about, right? In any sizable population, the ability of any positive mutation to actually create a change in the genome is very small, right? Because almost all individuals of the species are producing more individuals of that species. Only one of them is producing one that's somehow different in some way, presumably with a positive mutation or something. But it just doesn't make any sense, right? Like in terms of, and scientists have come up with all kinds of little bullshit things to justify the ways that it doesn't make sense. Like genetic drift. Genetic drift was created because scientists were trying to explain evolution without requiring positive mutations because of the neutral and nearly neutral theories that were presented by an evolutionists back in the 70s, right? And so, but the math doesn't works on genetic drift even less than it works on any even proposed mutation metric, right? Like genetic drift can only conceivably make any kind of change in the genome of a population in populations of well under 100. I mean, additionally, it should be noted that the time frames just don't make a lot of sense. If you look at the fossil record, you've got huge numbers of new species appearing in a very short period of time, and they seem to appear along that time frame regardless of the duration of life cycle or reproductive cycle. Uh, it's just not consistent with the idea of a very slow process of gradualism, which is the kind of evolution you're talking about there when you're talking about positive mutations and stuff. That's a gradualist evolutionary frame. But the fossil record suggests punctuated equilibrium, which means you got to explain shit tons of new complex multicelled organisms occurring and evolving out of protoforms over a period of 10 million years or something. If we look at the speed at which any species of isolated whatever is purportedly evolving right now and extrapolate out how long it would take to evolve then we would say it would take forever. And evolutionists are constantly contradicting themselves about this stuff. Like Anton, I was watching today, was saying how it took 4.5 billion years for Earth to evolve evolution. Except there have been many extinction events between the beginning of Earth and now. The last one was 60 million years ago. So it's taken at most 60 million years to evolve intelligence. Why didn't it evolve before? Blah, 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 blah. Who knows? But the point is, if it only takes 60 million years to evolve intelligence from basically nothing, then then we should be able to see change at a very rapid rate. Well, I don't doubt that they do occur following big events, right? So okay, I get it. You've wiped out a lot of the life, so there's a lot of ecological niches that can be filled now. It still doesn't explain how a lizard becomes an elephant, right? We have if evolution were an explanation that deserved our respect, it would have some kind of genetic clock. It would be able to tell us how long it would take for Mia to evolve into Mia. It would make predictions that we can test and validate rather than falsify. It wouldn't have self-contradictory definitional problems. It wouldn't constantly be changing what it is either. Remember, Darwinian evolution was purely gradualist. There was no punctuated equilibrium because that part of the fossil record hadn't been uncovered yet. I mean, there's no doubt that, say, birds are more similar to each other than they are to mammals, right? And that certain creatures have genetic similarities that are suggestive of the kind of evolutionary answers that people have come up with, right? It's suggestive of that. But the thing to remember is that evolution is there to explain the fossil record. It's not, the fossil record does not itself prove evolution. That's backwards. Do scientists explain homosexuality as a byproduct of evolution? I don't know. Typically, you'll hear just about everything explained through an evolutionary lens, you know? Like, it was beneficial in these ways for this species to develop this thing, and therefore they did. Yeah, it just doesn't make any sense at the end of the day, unfortunately. I wish we had an explanation for where species came from that was satisfactory, right? Because we can know what an explanation that's satisfactory would look like. Like if evolution were a satisfactory explanation, then it would be able to tell us that Mia species went from proto-species Mia to current species Mia in this length of time via this sequence of steps. We'd be able to replicate it in species that have very short lifespans and or reproductive cycles. Because after all, if the mechanism is the same for things that have extremely slow reproductive cycles as it is for things with extremely fast reproductive cycles, then it must evolve faster when you have more generations in the same amount of time. So if in fact we could evolve something into an elephant over this long amount of time, then we should be able to make equivalent changes to a firefly in this amount of time. I mean, a fruit fly. But it is not a real explanation, so it doesn't do any of the things that it ought to do. It doesn't allow us to do any of the science that science theories are supposed to allow you to do. make predictions, test them, validate them. Be internally sensible, most of all. Be internally sensible, most of all. So, because it has fewer genes that can change, it evolves more slowly. Okay, so you're positing this counterbalancing force of complexity evolves faster, simplicity evolves slower, simplicity reproduces faster, complexity reproduces slower, so they balance out in terms of time. Well, this is sounding very much like what concentric circles, right? Just when Galileo was doing his solar system stuff and the church insisted that no, everything in the heavens be a perfect circle, so they had to make endless concentric circles to make this thing presumably work. Remember what evolution started out as? It takes 4.5 billion years for everything to evolve. We evolved very gradually over the 4.5 billion years, and that's why we can't test it and do that kind of stuff. That was falsified by the fossil record, so they changed it to punctuated equilibrium. There was problems with the positive mutation notion, so people came up with the neutral and nearly neutral theory of evolution. There were problems with the definition of species being reproductively viable offspring, so they stopped defining the term. This is the kind of bullshit that happens when something is not correct. The only reason it persists as an explanation is because people position it as either evolution or religion. When you have to come up with a bunch of new stuff all the time to justify big problems with your explanation, then probably the core concept needs to be scrapped. I mean, sexuality is an ontological complexity, you know? No, I'm not saying it's junk because it needs to be modified, right? I'm saying that the same problems that were solved by it taking 4.5 billion years are unsolved now when it only takes uh, 60 million years or 10 million years, as in the Cambrian explosion, right? So the reason why the original theory was 4.5 billion years and gradualist was that explained why we couldn't see evolution happening now. Okay, so if you do make it not gradualist now, we have that same problem, except it's no longer solved. Now it's unsolved. So you have to come up with a concentric circle, punctuated equilibrium, which says evolution starts for some time, goes really, really fast for everything at the same speed, and then it stops. And the explanation is, well, it's done evolving. It's found its form that it's fit to be, and therefore filling a niche. That's not an explanation of a process that is that functions like a mechanism, right? We need to have an explanation for how these things occur in a way that's replicable in some fashion. And it's testable in some fashion that answers real questions, right? So, like, like if we imagine the, I mean, if you just try to reverse engineer any change from this to that and ask what specific changes would be required and in what succession, it becomes immediately obvious that the amount of changes includes a great number of things that only work at all when they're done. Like, for example, a car, if you take out one part of it, it doesn't work at all, right? It's not like, oh, I took out the I don't know, spark plugs, took out the battery or something. Well, it's not like it works just not as well as it does when you have all the parts. It doesn't work at all. Well, he probably just didn't want to. He didn't want to. He probably didn't want to be gay. You know, it's not generally as well accepted as being straight. So yeah, it, if in fact like your explanation that the simple things evolve more slowly because they have fewer genes, that really doesn't make any sense, right? Like if it doesn't matter how many genes something has, isn't it equally subject to mutation? I mean, maybe some things are more subject to mutation because of how they are, like frogs or something. But the idea that less complex things would evolve more slowly because they're less complex, that again requires some kind of mechanism to understand why that would be the case. They they reproduce the same as other things, then why would they be subject to less mutation because there's less total genomic material or something? Just because they're smaller creatures? It doesn't really make any sense as far as I can tell, unless there's some additional mechanism, like uh, there's a some correlation between simplicity and shielding from radiation or something. Also, if mutation is a significant factor, we should see less evolution in underwater creatures because they have better radiation shielding. But the point is, scrambling around to try to find explanations for questions that evolution still can't answer after 150 years, it seems to be a desperate attempt to cling to something that obviously ought to be jettisoned as an explanation. If we think about the fossil record, for example, we could look at the fossil record of houses and we conclude that they go from simpler to more complex over time and think that somehow the houses themselves evolved, but that would not be correct, right? Um, Obviously, with the fossil record for animals, what we see are a lot of distinct distinct species appearing in a short period of time, and I mean that's just not an adequate explanation, right? It just doesn't do what it needs to do to explain things. I've got many problems with it. First and foremost, there's a contradiction implicit in it if you define species as two individuals that produce a reproductively viable offspring of the same species, then evolution is not really possible because things have to remain the same species until all of a sudden they're a different species. And that doesn't make any sense. Um, Second of all, uh, punctuated equilibrium as a mechanism needs to be explained. So the idea that evolution goes super fast for a little while and then stops for reasons explained only as it's done, well, that's not an acceptable explanation. There's some potential, like maybe there could be some convincing explanation involving genetic change over time and isolation of subpopulations into that themselves genetically change over time and become distinct species over the course of being isolated from each other, right? That might make some sense if evolution took 4.5 billion years. But even then, it wouldn't make sense because there's still no mechanism for increased complexity. Positive mutation as a mechanism for increased complexity doesn't make any sense. We don't see positive mutations, and regardless, even if we did, there's no way to mutate in something that's already done, right? Like, um, for example, a woodpecker. So we know that woodpeckers hit their heads extremely hard against trees to dig out the bugs underneath them. But the problem with the idea of that having evolved over time is until they can peck at the wood hard enough to get at the insect, pecking at it at all doesn't do any good. So if you imagine it's starting out with as a bird that didn't peck at the tree, but instead got food some other way, we can conceive of one bird who didn't peck at the food have being born with some positive mutation that helped them to peck a little bit at a tree. But if it's the same species as it was before, it still is going to necessarily get its food the other way primarily. And that's what it's optimized to do. The fact that it has this new ability to peck at a tree is going to be very weak at best at the beginning and won't produce uh, enough additional benefit to that bird that not only will he be the only one of his species to survive or something, but for example that his mutation will take foot in the species as a whole because it's advantageous, but that will require him to be more reproductively successful than the other birds. And there's no reason to think that would occur. We can all agree on negative selection, right? That environmental conditions, when they're harsher, kill the weaker members of a species, and that when they're less harsh, they kill fewer of those. So, but that all that does is return us back to the idea that a population can have certain aspects of their genomic range preferred or not, selected for slash against or not, right? But that doesn't involve any mutation. It doesn't explain the increased complexity over time. It also doesn't explain the fact that, as I pointed out, if in fact there's a single mechanism that is responsible for evolution, then that mechanism should operate at a much faster rate with species with shorter lifespans and reproductive cycles than for species with long lives and slow reproductive cycles. Indeed, if evolution were an actual explanation, it would tell us it took this long to evolve from this to this, and these were the steps that needed to be attained to do that genetically, the changes that needed to be attained. And then we'd be able to say, okay, if we can evolve this much in this amount of time, then we should be able to evolve fruit flies this much in that amount of time equivalently, because we can operate with them on very fast generations. We've already done experiments with over 70,000 generations of them. Fly Guy speculates that maybe things that are simpler evolve more slowly because they have fewer genes. But the mechanisms that purportedly drive evolution don't operate like that. And regardless, that's just like a speculative answer to a question evolution doesn't have an answer for. And real explanations need to answer these kind of questions. It's not adequate for a purportedly science explanation to say, no, you can't test us. There's no predictions you can test. Sorry. I mean, it's insane, right? If in fact evolution were right, we'd have multiple different species out of dogs instead of all the same species. How do we know they're the same species? Because dogs can still breed with wolves and produce reproductively viable offspring, even if they're chihuahuas. So, despite the fact that humans selected in favor of mutation way more than nature ever would, and despite the fact that humans selected extreme variations, in favor of extreme variations, way more than nature ever could, and the fact that we've been breeding dogs for 10,000 years tells us something important. We can stretch the plasticity of a genome way further than nature ever can or would, and we still can't speciate things. They're still the same species. Okay, well, if you say so. I've not encountered that data, but it's also the case that can they reproduce with other ones that we have bred into this purported new species? I've never encountered this information before. Okay, so they can't reproduce at all. That's different. That's not speciation. We can also create ligers and stuff like that. Hybridization is not the explanation for evolution anyway. Evolution does not claim hybridization as a mechanism. Okay, so how do we know they can't reproduce with the original fish? Like, have they tried to artificially inseminate them, or they just don't reproduce with the original fish? Oh, mules reproduce rarely? Okay, well, again, hybridization, though, is not the mechanism by which evolution claims to have attained genetic change. That's absolutely not the mechanism. So, yes, hybridization can create some weird things, like mules, right? But that's not the mechanism by which evolution claims to create new species. So it doesn't prove anything. The reality is, of course, those two species that we hybridized into this new, not reproductively viable thing, mostly, they would never have reproduced if humans hadn't made them in the first place. An actual explanation would not only allow us to replicate its processes, right, according in keeping with the mechanism that it purportedly explains things by, and it would answer questions like how long it took to get from here to here, and how many steps it had to, how many specific genetic changes it had to make, and how long that took. It would answer that question, because otherwise it's not actually explaining things. Like when we look at actually good theories like relativity or something, it's validated on every single prediction since it was generated by Einstein. Every single thing about it has validated. You'll note that relativity has not changed. To the extent that things disagreed with reality was an entirely new frame. With relativity was an entirely new frame, namely a quantum frame, right? That's how real science theories work. They make sense intuitively, which evolution might seem to at first, right? If you accept the idea of positive mutations being selected in favor of. But it doesn't just make sense intuitively. You can use the information to do things with it, right? You can determine things based on your understanding of how the mechanisms of this idea work. You cannot do that with evolution. And that's a serious problem, right? That means it's not a real explanation. Well, sure, because you've got lungfish, right? That have lungs and gills, I guess. But what you don't have are things with partially developed lungs that they're going to someday and later on in their evolutionary development use on land, right? Because there'd be no reason to select in favor of those partial changes, and no reason to think those partial changes would complete since mutation is random. And I want to reiterate, I am not a creationist. I'm looking for an actual explanation that does the job of an actual explanation, not bullshit, right? Like, we all know about genetics and selecting in favor of and against certain traits way back from Mendel and his P's. So there's no disputing that genetics are real things, right? But the idea that a given species of creature pops off some population of itself that somehow isn't itself anymore at the same time, it doesn't make any sense, right? It requires the founder's effect. It requires bottlenecks. It requires a series of impossibilities, really. Like, let's say some mutation does differentiate adequately from the species in a beneficial way. Well, then, if it is in fact a different species, then who's it going to mate with? And if it's not a different species, then like how is it likely that everybody but the thing that has that positive mutation and maybe like one other are going to survive to create this founder's effect? The concentric circle aspect of the thing is just appalling. All these qualifications that evolutionists have come up with to to justify the fact that the original idea doesn't work. Pretty cat, I don't think about Hunter Biden at all. I don't know why you do. Like Hunter Biden. Just why do you care? Why do you care about Hunter Biden? Why? Why in the world would anybody care about him? He needs to evolve. Trump is engaged again? Wait, isn't Trump married? Oh, Eric Trump is married. I thought you were saying, speaking of kids, Eric, Trump is engaged. Well, good for him. Eric Trump is engaged. Sure, David. I just want my explanations to make sense. That's all I want in life. I want things to make sense. That's like for a large part of my life, I assumed evolution did make sense and explained things. And then at some point, I started something about it didn't make sense to me. I started researching it more, and I realized, oh my god, this is a complete fucking clusterfuck of nonsense. I couldn't believe how bad the the landscape reality was in terms of competing notions, qualifications, non-explanations, failure to validate, etc. I was shocked. You mean Donald Trump Jr., huh? And for a second, Mr. Biden was your father and he had a case of dementia. Would you put your country first and reveal this? Well, I mean, the bottom line is, regardless, not really anything happened during Biden's presidency, so he didn't really do anything. He wasn't a bad president, really, despite having dementia. Ronald Reagan had dementia in his second term. So, it's something we've gotten through together before. Yeah, it might have been a good thing. In general, presidents that don't do things are better than presidents that do things. Hi, Iron Lion. Without sense, chaos would make sense. Truth matters. I don't know. I get frustrated because people talk about evolution all the time. And you have, like, Jordan Peterson, for example, is an evolutionary psychologist who purports to explain why people are the way they are because of in framings of how it was evolutionarily advantageous to be like this. I mean, it's just begging the question. I mean, it's quite possible his family didn't know he had dementia. My dad didn't know my mom had dementia for a long time until my aunt told him. Slow boil, you know. If you're around somebody all the time, you don't necessarily notice the subtle changes. So I think we'll give him the benefit of the doubt regarding that. Just because my experience shows me that my dad took a long time to note that. My mom probably knew it before he did and didn't tell him, I'm guessing. Yeah, plenty of people who are not in the spotlight don't want to admit their loved one has dementia, so they could just be in denial too, right? I said he had dementia while he was running for president in no uncertain terms. I could tell. But I had a mom who was in the throes of that, so I was well attuned to it, I guess. I can totally get why other people might not have noticed it. If you haven't had it in your family, I'm an SI type, so I get why people don't know things until they experience them. The ancient bristlecone pines. It's an interesting species of tree. They live a really long time. They're kind of like a little bit of extremophiles because they live way high up above the tree line, I think. In very cold, dry conditions. I don't think Trump has dementia, but I do think that he's not at his. He's past his intellectual peak, obviously, but I think he was always just fucking just punishingly ESFP. Just he was always uh, ridiculous, just absolutely ridiculous. Yeah, they want to put his name on everything all the time. Like, do you really need to put your name on everything? What are you, fucking Tyler Perry? It's not really fair to people to say you're too old to be president or something, because there are people who make it all the way to 100 and are perfectly lucid, you know? This is an Nintendo doll. That's pretty good. Yeah, that's so ridiculous. Just will you stop with the naming everything after yourself? I'd be fine with a cognitive with a getting a clean bill of health as far as dementia or cognitive decline goes. I think that would be a fine compromise if you want to stipulate special conditions for older people to get elected. My dad was 82 when he died, and he was still totally with it. He didn't really have any cognitive decline at all that I could tell. I still think it's like, why does somebody that old want to be president even? Aren't you ready to just, like, I'm sure at a certain point, you're like, okay, I don't feel like having that much responsibility. Merry Christmas. It's that time of year again. Merry Christmas. Santa's coming down the chimney when tonight at exactly 12 o'clock. Coming down the chimney tonight. Night. Yeah, it's the holiday season. That's for sure. Yesterday was really crowded at the supermarket. Like they're trying to get their shopping in before Christmas. Pretty inconvenient time of year for my car to break down. That's really a kick in the nuts, I tell you. Well, what are you gonna do? Just gotta bend over and take it. If it hadn't happened this time of year, the car would be done at least like 5 or 6 days earlier. But since it is done this time of year, the auto shop is off today, tomorrow, Friday. So what are you gonna do? It's not so bad, really. I've been processing it more. It really bothered me. It's been bothering me a lot because of the way it played out, the very TE way it played out. You know, you don't know until they get their hands in there and find out some things. Say the supermarket was packed. Two ladies, an employee and a customer, got into a fight at checkout. The customer said, "Your wig matches your attitude. Horrible." What did the employees say in response? "I'm not wearing a wig. This is my real hair." Yeah. And try to keep a positive attitude and stuff and not get all like fixated on stuff that's out of your control. I've tried to do a better job of that part of things. Oh, that's right, I finished that pack of cigarettes. Um, had to be fixed, and ultimately, I'm fine with this solution. You know, it's possible I could have come up with a cheaper or better solution, but this solution will have to do, and it's fine. You shouldn't be talking with a face like that, huh? Mm. You shouldn't be talking with a face like that. It's not bad. If you got to come up with a quick retort, did I believe in Santa as a child? Not for very long. I'm not really sure I ever really believed in Santa. I began asking questions about Santa very early on. It seemed to me I was relieved when my parents said, "Yeah, there's no Santa." It's like, okay. Because that doesn't make any sense. Delilah, in contrast, she was really enamored with the idea of Santa, and she like continued to believe it until she was like 10 years old or something. Yeah, well, the wig comment is pretty brutal. I wonder what initiated the conflict in the first place. Do you believe in Santa? What time is it? 3:30. I should probably make myself something to eat. Let's see what the schedule of sporting events looks like. The football game starts today at what time? Why don't they have it on the thing here? Until we don't even have it on the schedule yet up here. Why not? Cal versus Hawaii. There it is. 5 p.m. 5 p.m. is what time that starts. USC versus TCU. Is this football? Oh yeah, this is football. December 30th. Okay. We're playing TCU, huh? That's fine. According to ESPN Analytics, we've got a 70% chance of winning. We're only favored by 6.5 points. Hopefully we'll do a good job today. Let me look at NCAA women's basketball. When does USC play next? I guess they get this week off because, let me see. Look at the rankings. USC. We next play, the women do, 12:29 against number 20 Nebraska, then 1-3 against number 4 UCLA. We've got a tough schedule this year. We are playing all kinds of ranked teams. We only got beat bad, really, by Connecticut. Although we got beat pretty bad by South Carolina, too. Obviously, we're not the team that we are with Juju in the mix. 8 p.m. Eastern. Well, that's not till 5 o'clock. There's not really much else on today, I don't think. Like, is hockey on? Let me see. There's a hockey game from the 23rd that I haven't watched, but I do sometimes watch the Sharks, the San Jose Sharks. Sports Center Special. What's this about? Year in review. Can I watch it from the beginning? Yes, I can. All right. I could watch this potentially. Sports Center Year in Review 2025. Okay, I think I'm going to wrap this up. Watch a little TV for a while. Until next time, I will see you later. Love you all. Thanks for being here.